and welcome to this episode of RECP Radio, where we are super excited to talk about Sandi's buyer and seller saga this year. We have a really unique experience that one of our team members got to be both the buyer and a seller all in the same year. And as someone who's also been on the other side of the closing table helping to prep, kind of a unique perspective to have been on the other side, on both sides. So Sandi, we're super excited for you to share your story today. Again, Sandi's our lead trainer here at Real Estate Closing Path. She has over 40 years of experience in the industry. And then we also have Pierre Boulogne-Glavin in the room. She's our head of marketing and assistant trainer. She's also had experience as a property manager. And then I am Janis. I am the executive director here, and I represent the outside perspective. I've never been in real estate. I've never been a closer, and maybe once a buyer. So who knows, maybe I'll chime in. All right, so Sandi, we have some questions. When you were first listing your house for sale, what was your perspective at the very beginning?
Well, having had lots of experience, I did what I thought was going to be required before the agent came over.
Huh?
And so, I purged and cleaned and depersonalized to an extent and all the things that I thought, and then she came over and I got a list as long as your arm of things to do that were not only work but money. So it was interesting that all along through the whole process, all the things that I thought I knew from the closing perspective,
Right.
at the end of the day, I was just a seller, then a buyer like everybody else.
Yeah. That's interesting because I kind of think like you do. There's certain things that are kind of customary to help prep a house to be listed. Can you share anything else that she was suggesting that maybe surprised you?
Well, I mean, again, we had completely remodeled the inside. We knew that we needed a new deck, and so that was already in the works. So we, knew that was coming. But there are certain things like outside, some of the things that I had planted, she didn't think showed the house to its best effect. So we had to, add some color and that kind of thing. There's a crawl space, and the crawl space was concrete block, and it had been painted, but several years before, but in some places the paint was coming off. I didn't even notice it. But she said the thing is, you don't want to have any little thing that somebody would look at it and say, oh, well, if you didn't do that, what else did you not do? And so it all made sense to me. Like there were some woodpecker holes in the trim on the chimney, which I didn't even notice, right? And so then we had the deck built, and then that she came back and looked and like, okay, now we got to put out some pine straw. It was so interesting to me because the house was, other than adding a new deck, was substantially the same, but it was just to notch up the appearance a little bit, And so it was things that I was thinking that as a buyer, I probably wouldn't even notice, but she was trying to say, but if you invest this much money, you will get that much more money and then some, and we will eliminate a lot of potential questions or problems on the seller side.
Right. So it sounds like she had good suggestions that you hadn't thought of, and that maybe it took a little more time to prep.
Right.
A little more time and investment up front.
And a little more money, But my takeaway from that was I'm an expert in what I do, and I'm tangentially related to other parts of the process. But the agent is an expert in what they do. She is a listing agent. This is what she does. And so it would be lunacy not to, why hire an expert if you're not going to listen to the expert?
True, true, true. That's good advice. Good advice. So I love that you had so much trust in your real estate agent. How did you decide upon a listing price?
I have a really good friend that's a realtor, and I contacted her and said, "Do you want this listing?" And she lived about an hour away from me. And she said, "I really wouldn't be able to work it to your advantage. But I have a good friend who is a partner in another one of my firm's offices near you. Can I refer you to her?" So it was a referral from a friend,
Mhm.
a direct referral. So I was inclined to trust her from the beginning because I trust my friend and my friend trusted her.
Right. That's good. And then, so was there a conversation around how did you even find a starting point to know how to list your house?
Um, yes, she suggested that we do an appraisal up front. She
Mhm.
paid for it. That was out of her pocket.
Wow.
She paid for the appraisal, which was very insightful for us because we saw not only the value, and of course, in our workshops when we talk about um, the all of the lender parts of the process, we look at an appraisal and all the things that they consider. And so we looked to see if there were any places we were getting a hit for not being at least equivalent to the comps. And of course, I
Mhm.
knew these are the comps today. If it sells in 30 days, these may not be the comps, they might be
Right.
something else. But I will say there's one point in which I wish I had listened to my own gut because the appraisal came back at a certain price and her initial listing was 10,000 more than that.
Wow.
And we're not in that market. And her thinking was if we list it above and then negotiations, we would end up at the appraised value.
Right.
But my
Right.
thinking was that I don't want to get a contract and then the house not appraised.
Right.
Having been a lender for 24 years before I moved over to the closing side, I'm thinking about what that appraisal could do to the whole transaction. So I relented and did what she said. And guess what? 90 days go by and we don't get a contract.
Okay. Oh
And we
no.
we reduced the price 2 or 3 times. And in the end, we ended up selling it just under the original appraised value, which
That's
was
good.
fine. I was satisfied with the sales price, but I think it could have been a lot sooner. I think we were overpriced for the market.
Gotcha.
And, it wasn't really a strong position for me to argue from because, again, she's the expert. But I
Yeah.
think about that. What if the seller is not me? What if
Yeah.
the seller is somebody with no experience and
Right.
they don't ever question anything that the realtor or the attorney or anybody
Right.
says and they just go along and that could be fine, right? But it made me more aware of when I'm dealing with the seller from a closing perspective, that they have placed a lot of trust in the people representing them as well. And so, I wish I had been a little more insistent about that. In the end, it worked out fine,
Mm-hmm.
but it could have worked out sooner.
Gotcha. Well, I love hearing your perspective, and especially there's kind of that fine line of trust the expert, but trust your intuition. And then you actually, at the end of the day, have a lot of minds that have to meet in the middle,
Right.
right? In this kind of process. And it sounds like together you were able to meet the goal and kind of hit the finish line and get the house
Yeah.
sold and
Yeah.
still, within the price and the time frame that was needed. So congratulations to you and your realtor. So also this past year, not only did you go from being seller, but also to the buyer side. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Well, that was interesting. Because again, I bought the house that we just sold in 2006. So it had been 19 years
Wow.
since I had sold another house that same year. So 19 years since I have sold or bought a house. Now, during that time, I've been a part of hundreds of closings,
Yeah.
you know, but it was um very clear to me when we finally found the property that we wanted to put a contract on. You know, as the settlement agent, the contract comes to us and we go, okay, we got another contract. We enter in our software and we do all the things. But how much has happened till it gets
Yeah.
to that point? I tell everybody in our workshop, when that contract is signed by everybody, the clock starts ticking. And that's true. But what's happened to get to that point? How many other offers did they make? How many other another property that we were interested in that went under contract before we could even look at it. And the property that we ended up buying was I saw it, made an appointment to look at it. It went under contract before we could look at it. I was devastated. And then 2 days later, all of a sudden it's back on the market. So now I'm like, okay, I can't quit thinking about that house, but why is it back on the market? And it was something to do with the buyer, had nothing to do with the property, in the end. But so from our settlement perspective, by the time the contract hits our inbox, what else has already happened?
Yeah.
So it was because I don't guess I'd ever in the interim time and all the closings I'd done even considered that. You
Wow.
know, how
Yeah.
many houses did they look at? You
Right.
know, what was their
Long
time
did it
frame?
take?
Were they in a hurry? That kind of thing. All the things that go into choosing, I don't know that I even thought about that.
Yeah, that's true. So even when you think of maybe receiving the contract as the start of the process, and yet that still could somehow be in the middle or the end of a long journey of the couple or
Right.
the person who's
Exactly
trying
right.
to, yeah, find a new home. That's an interesting perspective. So how did the change in working with a new agent,
Um,
how did that experience
it
feel?
was great because it was somebody I knew. It was in a different
Okay.
location, so it was somebody I knew, and it was great because we were already friends.
Yeah.
So I had the privilege of knowing that she was looking out for me. I mean, she would contact the seller's agent and ask questions, and then she would report back to me and go, I didn't like that answer. So here's what we're going to do. You know, so she kind of led me along the way. Um, Even though I have a lot of experience in this, I'm also not confrontational. I'm going to walk all the way around the bush 42 times to keep from hurting somebody's feelings. So I would never blatantly, say to the seller, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, she didn't mind doing that at all, which is, why you
Good.
hire an agent, right? That's what
That's
they do.
right.
And so it also was a root. People have told me throughout the 40 plus years of my career, you should have been a realtor. You love talking, you love looking. No, because I would not be good in negotiations because I'm not confrontational. Um,
Yeah.
so I learned that for sure. Um, but it was great in that I always knew that she had my best interest at heart, and it came down to a major repair,
Mm.
and the seller was extremely reluctant.
Mm.
And, of course, I, like every buyer, really wanted the house, right? And so I'm like, well, what am I willing to give up to get it?
Yeah.
And she is like, no, this is major. If he won't do this, we'll find another property.
Ooh,
And she's right, but I needed somebody that was not emotionally involved in it.
true. Mm.
So,
True.
again, no matter how I counsel people in our workshops, um, it gave me a very strong reminder of how emotional the parties are in this transaction.
Yeah. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Uh, the stress of it all. In fact, I was going to ask, which did you find most stressful, the selling process or the buying process?
Um, well, the most stressful part of the selling process, other than it taking so long and having to, they would call me and say, somebody wants to come in 15 minutes. Oh, let me Swiffer up all the dog hair and load everybody in the car. That was an ordeal. But really, the most stressful part was the negotiating after the inspection,
Yeah.
because we felt like we had done so much and spent so much money. And how dare you?
Yeah.
Like any other seller, my house is perfect.
Yeah.
How dare you ask me for anything, right?
Right.
And that's how
Right.
sellers are, and I'd lived in that house
Cool.
19 years. I was very attached to it. On the buyer side, really the most stressful part, again, negotiating about the repairs. That was the thing. We didn't argue about price or closing or any of that. um, our loan was handled by a loan originator that actually used to be my boss,
Oh, wow.
somebody that I used to work for. So I knew her very well. There was no problem with the loan. It was very smooth and easy. No problem with the appraisal, anything like that. But the most stressful part of buying was right in the beginning, when two properties we liked went under contract before we could even
Yeah.
look at them. And
Yeah.
so I'm realizing that in the area that we wanted to buy, if something's available and you like it, you better jump on it. And
Mm.
so,
Got to
you
be
know,
ready.
yeah, and that's not always possible. I'm available when my husband's not available, and we have responsibilities at home and we can't leave. And, you know, so it's not, your life doesn't always allow that. So you just have to kind of come to the place where you go, you know what? If it's meant to be, it'll work
It'll
out,
be.
and I can't beat myself up over this. So I stressed out about it. Once we were under contract, it was like a big sigh of relief, and the rest of the process wasn't too bad.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. So I know we said that you had the two perspectives of buyer and seller, but I also want to ask you about that third perspective, because what was your experience like with the closing office when that's been your whole career?
Right,
Surely you
right.
have some opinions and understand more than the average buyer or seller of what should be happening. And
Well,
can
the
you talk
attorney
about
that
that?
closed my sale, the buyer picked them, but it's a firm I'm familiar with, and they were great. They communicated great with me, sent me a seller information sheet. Now, I will say, I'm sure I was their dream seller, no joke, because I completed the information sheet. I gave them the information they were asking for in the time. I understood how important it
Yeah.
was for them to get my payoff information and to
Yeah.
have our socials so that they could, you know, do all the things that they need to do with regard to title. So we provided them all that information because, from my career perspective, I understood how important it was to provide
Yeah.
it. They send you the seller information sheet, you get it back to them yesterday. Don't make them wait. Right, Pierre? You're waiting on the seller information sheet, and then they're irritated because you don't have everything ready. And I'm like, you didn't give me what I need. So that was smooth, went off without a hitch. Closing was great. They sent us our prelim CD. The numbers were fine. We got to closing. It was easy. On the purchase, it was in another city. And so the closing attorney was not somebody I was familiar with. During the process, they used a software that had some integration with outside parties, buyers and sellers and agents, so we could upload documents directly to their software and all of that. And so that was easy. If they asked me for something, I could just go in and do it. That was easy. It was no problem. When we got to actually sit at the closing table, apparently, um, someone had told the attorney what I did, because there was not even an attempt to explain anything.
Oh, I
It
see.
was a hybrid closing. And so the lender had sent us all the docs that we could e-sign, and we had already done that. So the only documents, this many, that we had to sign at the table, they had to be wet signed. There was no attempt to explain what anything was. Of course, I didn't need an explanation. I was explaining them to my husband, but I had already told him before we got there, everything is going to be, vanilla, all the things that have to be done. And basically, you don't sign it, you don't get the money. So just sign it. So he did. So it was no problem. Um, I could tell that my seller was an investor. So I could tell that this attorney and this seller and their agent had done multiple transactions together because they were having old home week conversation the whole time. It's like we weren't even there, just signed the papers. So there was no effort toward us whatsoever. I didn't really care for me. But if I'm a first time home buyer, it made me aware, somebody's buying a house for the first time and they're already scared. They get in there, their loan's been approved, but they're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. They don't know until everything's signed and they get the keys that it's really going to be all right.
Yeah.
And then the attorney's office does nothing to make them feel comfortable.
Yeah. It can be overwhelming. Yeah.
Nothing at all. And so then when it was all over, they handed us the keys and we got no documentation.
What?
They did hand us a copy of our CD, and that's all. Nothing, no copies of anything else.
Oh my goodness, Sandy.
And I said to the attorney, will I be able to retrieve our documents from your software? And he said yes. So I'm assuming they don't give them to me because I can go in to their software like I have been doing and retrieve my documents myself, which is fine, no problem.
Right. Should be convenient.
So yes, absolutely. It can work beautifully.
Yeah.
So I waited about 3 or 4 days. I was trying to give them time to get the documents recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep going into the file and there's nothing and nothing and nothing. It's not been uploaded. So I emailed the closer that I had contact for and said, when are we going to get our documents? And I got a really not very nice email back saying, like she was treating me like I was a toddler and I had no idea. We don't generally give it. And so, of course I fired back. I happen to know that it is your responsibility to provide me with a copy of everything I signed, whether it's digital or a paper copy. And I would like copies. And so she sent me a couple of things and I had to go back and go, well, that's great, but where's my recorded warranty deed? Where's the owner's policy that I paid for? I kept having to ask. And then I got crickets before I got everything. So ultimately, I looked up on their website and got the attorney's email address. And I mailed the attorney directly. And then guess what? Too sweet, I got some documents in my inbox, and they apologized for the convenience. But inconvenience, but I can tell you that I would not only not recommend that particular, not the whole firm, because I don't know about the other offices, but I would not only not recommend them, I would recommend against them if somebody were to ask me. So it made me think how, again, we talk about the mechanics of what we do and how it's important to do the things correctly. But even if you do all the things correctly and you don't build any relationships, you've shot any potential you ever have for future business. My agent will never close there again.
Right.
I would never close there again. If I got a contract, if I were still in, working for if I got a contract and that was the closing attorney, I would say, you don't want to close there. Yeah. So it made me aware that we don't ever want to be that, right? And we don't want any of our people that we train to ever be that.
Right.
We want them to be the people that you want to do business with, and I tell our closers that we're training a lot, they interact a lot with the lender, and ultimately the agents drive the contracts on a purchase, but on a refinance, those title orders come to us from a lender, and their experience with us on purchases could determine whether or not they're going to send us their refinance business. Right now, that doesn't matter. But the Fed just reduced the rate, and that's going to trickle down to mortgage rates in another month, So we're going to have somewhat of a refi boom. I don't know that it's going to be as significant as it has been in the past, but all those refinances are going to go somewhere. And how we've treated those lenders
Right.
is going to determine whether or not they send those title requests to us.
Right. Right. That's so true. Wow, it's such a good reminder that as much as the technical side of understanding the closing process is so important, the customer service side just can't be minimized, right? It's
Right.
just so important. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I know it's something you focused on in our training workshops, to let people know that the way you treat them matters and that people remember how you made them feel,
Right.
and that is a significant part of that repeat business coming back. So great perspective, Sandy. Here, is there anything you want to ask or say at this point?
Well, I wanted to say that it's so interesting to hear about your experience on the other side of the table because we're so used to doing the work that it's almost bizarre to hear about like yeah, those are real people who who show up to closing and sign these documents. But it makes me think of when Sandy and I are in the workshops together, we stick to a script. We pretty much say the same thing in every workshop, or whatever that workshop
Okay.
is. If it's pre-closing, we don't really change it up that much. We say
Right.
what there is to be said about pre-closing, and we don't vary it. Sometimes we
Right.
get attorneys who have a lot of experience taking our pre-closing classes. They maybe have done it before. We're still going to say the same stuff because the information doesn't change. So it
Right.
surprises me a little bit that even though, Sandy, you have so much experience, you show up to the closing table and they don't say anything to you. It's kind of like,
Um,
guys, stick to the script. You have to say
yeah.
this stuff. This is
Exactly.
for everybody.
Right. Right. Yeah, it did make me think you were exactly right, Pierre. It did make me think, is this how you treat every buyer?
Everything.
Mhm.
Or is it just because you think I'm experienced and don't need all the hand holding,
Right.
you know? But at any rate, I said to my agent, the attorney could have said, I understand that you're experienced in this business, so I won't handhold you. We will just go through the documents. But if you have any questions or anything you feel the need to say, I
Right.
want you to know I'm available for that. That's only what I had to say.
Right.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
Doesn't take much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
And we always say that, we do these every day. We close 30, 100 files a month. But it could be that person's first time or only time
right,
ever doing it. So it's
right,
necessary to say it every time. If you
Right.
repeat yourself 10 times a day, oh well, people have to
right.
hear that information.
Right.
And we for
Stick
sure
to the
don't want to
script.
create that atmosphere. If you have to buy a car, you go, ugh, I would rather eat dirt than have to go buy a car because the process is a nightmare.
Hmm.
And we don't want this process to be a nightmare. There are things that we can't control.
Right.
We can't control what they find on the inspection. We can't control the appraisal. We can't control the qualification on the lender's side. But the things that we do have some input in, let's do them the best we can. Let's strive for excellence, not just in the mechanics of what we do, but in how we treat people.
Right.
Right. A good reminder. It's so important to put the best foot forward
Right.
and to be mindful of the reputation that you're creating. It's not just for you as a person, but again, your attorney's name and reputation and business to be on the line and the whole firm. So
Yep.
important. So important. Um, Cindy, do you have any final key takeaways that you want to share with
Well, I
us?
just want to say that I was, like Peter said, I was surprised because I thought, I got this. You know, I was very surprised at my emotional reactions to it. Um, because, like every other seller, when they come back with their amendment to address concerns, I'm offended. Like, how dare you? Even though it was reasonable and not excessive or anything like that, but still, I'm thinking, I have put my heart and soul into this house for almost 20 years. I raised my children here, and if it was good enough for us the way it is, it's good enough for you. And we put so much work into it.
Yeah.
But like any other seller, I'm offended by that, right? I'm also, as soon as we get an offer, in my mind, I'm counting my money. You know, I'm calculating from the sales price what all my costs are going to be, take out my closing costs that I'm paying, the commission, you know, blah, 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 and what's my net going to be. And so throughout the process, everything that changed, I'm doing a little addition or subtraction from my net, you know, which I always tell everybody, don't count your money. You know, just like gambling while you're sitting at the table, don't count your money. I even said this to a brand new agent on Tuesday. You know, don't start counting your commission yet because you may have to pay for a warranty. You may have to, you know. And then on the buyer side, because we put in so much effort as the seller, I was surprised in a way that our seller did not do that. Now, on the other hand, the property he was selling was not his primary residence. It was an investment property. And so he's not emotionally attached to it. So the efforts, and so, you know, it looked nice. And it did look nice. And we had him fix some things on the inspection. But it wasn't until after we closed and we're in there that we start realizing that a lot of what he did was pretty things up. There was a lot of other things, you know, things that I would have never done as a seller. I would have made sure that was handled because to me they were safe, not cosmetic issues, safety issues, you know, that kind of electrical things that had to be repaired. I would have never done that as a seller. And again, my husband tells me every day, not everybody thinks like you. And of course, my response is, well, they should. But they're not ever going to. It was just surprising to me how emotional I was, even though I'm experienced in the process.
Yeah, so true. I appreciate the emotional roller coaster that you've been on, having been on both sides of the buyer and seller process. Do you have any like final takeaway or final maybe teachable moment for that person who is the closer, and what should they keep in mind?
Well, one thing is, I would see if I could suss out what the relationship is between the buyer and seller and their agents, you know, because you then you know if they trust their agent. And that's a big deal. It impacts how you relate to them. You know, am I going to contact you directly? Because if they don't trust their agent and you tell their agent something, they may be angry because it never gets to them or they don't like the way it was delivered or whatever. So, you know, we kind of have to figure that out. And then, like Pierre said, we had to remember that every one of these transactions represent people. And it's a big deal in their life. You know, when we're selling, I'm trying to coordinate getting all these things done, getting the movers there, getting that so we can be there to clean up so they can have possession so I don't have to pay $500. You know, so there's a lot of coordinating things that go on that are outside of our office. So just recognize that they're all people. It's not just about money. They're all people, and this is a big thing in their life.
Yes, yes, so true. And I'm reminded that, you know, real estate is supposed to be one of the happy laws and category to be involved with. And so as much as possible, you want to help to contribute to the positive experience for all.
Right.
Yeah. Great, Sandy. I really appreciate you sharing your story today. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? Final question, comment?
I want to shout out that we have other material around professionalism in the workplace. And if you're looking for that, it lives on our YouTube channel, or you can find it through our website in our free training section.
That's great. And we invite you to participate in any of our workshops. If we can ever be of service, we'd love to help. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.